Welcome to the Emerging Literacy Buddy Network, June 2019. The Buddy Networks are designed to facilitate collaboration within small groups of schools in local areas. Whilst there are elements of new content, the primary focus is to reflect on previous aspects of development and look into how you can support one another in terms of embedding a whole school approach to emerging literacy. Through the Buddy Networks, we explore the three broad aims of identifying what it means to take a whole school approach to emerging literacy, having an opportunity to share our own progress in terms of taking a developmental approach, and looking at similarities across our Buddy Networks in order to identify ways in which we can work collectively to support our next steps. The session agenda identifies the key aspects that we're going to explore during today's session and also some of the approximate timings. As you work through the session, there's different points for you to pause and reflect and to give time for discussion across the different areas. We're going to begin today's session with a voice on the table. Depending on the number of people that are in your group, you may want to split into smaller groups in order to do this. For tonight's voice on the table, you're going to start with the person with the longest surname and then move clockwise. Share your name, your place of work and your role, and something that you enjoy about the summer. You should now pause the video. Throughout your duration of engagement with the Emerging Literacy Networks, we've explored the emerging literacy key concepts that you can see on the screen now. In this session, we will explore some of the updated research around phonological awareness. We will explore what it means to take a developmental approach to emerging literacy in Primary 1. We'll reflect on the Primary 1 to Primary 2 transition, and we'll investigate a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication moving forward. For the first part of this session, we are going to watch part of Dr. Laura Shapiro's April 2019 presentation to educational psychologists and speech and language therapists in Highland. If you'd like to access the full presentation after this session, you can do so on the URL provided. In this session, we will be exploring section 1 of Laura's presentation, in identifying what the role is of phonological awareness in learning to decode words, and further exploring how do children with poor phonological awareness respond to phonics, and what aspects of phonological awareness are most critical. Following the video, there will be a targeted discussion around Laura's presentation.
So first of all, first part of the talk, all about phonological awareness. So this is a study that we published in 2016 where we were comparing two early reading programs in schools around Birmingham. And what we wanted to do was to compare the skills that were important for children's reading under different teaching methods. Because obviously the way that you're teaching children to read means that you're going to be drawing on slightly different skills depending on how you're teaching them. And so we compared what we're calling an intensive phonics program, so the letters and sounds program. So this is widely used in schools in England, and I know that schools up here do use letters and sounds to some extent as well. So letters and sounds is classic phonics program. It's very much focusing on encouraging children to decode every word when they possibly can, minimising the number of tricky words and trying to focus on the grapheme-phoneme correspondences. And we compared that to schools who were delivering what we're calling a less intensive program, sort of more mixed programs, the early reading research program, which did teach phonics, but it taught the minimum number of phonics skills. So it only taught the regular grapheme-phoneme mappings, so the most regular mappings. So it's only one, you're only teaching one mapping for each grapheme. So it's only the most regular ones. So it teaches fewer mappings and it combines that with regular practice in sight words, recognising words by sight. So highly frequent words, whether they're regular or irregular, they'll all be taught by sight. And in every literacy lesson, they're doing phonological awareness in the absence of print as well. So they're doing lots of practice on segmentation and blending in the absence of print, so oral segmentation and blending. So their two methods are sort of subtly different. They both count as phonics, so phonics is still covered in both. But one is more intensive. The phonics is really, really the main focus, and the other one is less intensive, and it's combined with regular practice on sight words and combined with more phonological awareness work. So what we found is that overall, good news for schools in lots of ways is that the programs are equally effective. So it's not, so from the school's perspective, it's not a big deal which of these programs they were using. The average child is doing fine on both of these programs. But what we did find is that it changed the way that they were being taught, changed the skills that were important for reading. So the children who were taught in the letters and sounds program, their reading outcomes are more strongly related to their phonological awareness. So we know that phonological awareness is really important for reading. You've got this relationship, regardless of whatever you do, you need phonological awareness to read. But if you're being taught under a really intensive phonics program, that relationship's even stronger. So children with good phonological awareness are better readers, whatever you do. If you also teach them intensive phonics, that's even stronger. So the children have got an even greater advantage for having good phonological awareness. That makes sense. So easier way to think about this. So we looked at the relationship for the kids overall, and so got a stronger correlation for the letters and sound school. But if you then look at children who are struggling with phonological awareness at the beginning of school, so what we did is we gave them three phonological awareness tasks, phoneme completion task, phoneme isolation task, and a phoneme deletion task. And the children that couldn't score on any of those tasks, that scored 0 at the beginning of school, we looked at those children separately. And I've got some numbers I can tell you on the next slide. But basically the children, it's about 20% of the sample overall, and we've got a sample of about 800. So there's sort of large, decent-sized groups of children. Those children were not responding so well to the more intensive phonics program, which is actually quite counterintuitive for a lot of teachers, I think, because the assumption is that if you teach children phonics, then their phonological awareness will develop kind of naturally, and that might work for some children, but actually our data would suggest that it's not something you can guarantee. You can't just guarantee that if you teach children phonics, they're not necessarily, if they've got poor phonological awareness at the beginning of school, they're not necessarily going to respond well to that. And so I don't know if you can see the graph here very clearly, but basically we've got so that for the average reader, so this is the top 80% of the sample, it doesn't actually make any difference which program they get, they do fine. This is their scores at the end of reception, the number of words they could read correctly, so regular words, that's regular words, exception words, and non-words. Top 80% of the sample, no difference between the two programs. Doesn't matter whether they're receiving letters and sounds or the early reading research. But the ones with poor phonological awareness, so the ones that struggled at the beginning of school and were just not able to do these phoneme awareness tasks, they're actually performing more poorly on the intensive phonics program, which is actually different to what many teachers would expect, certainly different to what you would expect given the Rose Review back in 2006. And this is that Letters and Sounds is the program that was emerged from that Rose Review, and so it is quite counterintuitive, but the whole point is to try and help children who are struggling with reading, and phonics is a good leveller. But I think what these data suggest is that children who struggle with phonological awareness at the beginning of school, they need something more than that. They do need to have that phonological awareness supported directly. You can't just assume that they will catch that catch that up just through being taught phonics. So, guess what our message is that phonological awareness is really important for learning to read, but it's especially important when you're learning synthetic phonics, because basically you're not going to get if you're scoring at floor on phonological awareness tasks, if you don't understand that the word cat breaks into cat, if you haven't got that concept, then it's going to be very difficult for you to learn the principles of phonics. And so the classroom teaching is just not going to be appropriate to you until you've got that basic concept. And it's also sort of ties in with other work that we've done. Basically, we've got other work looking at the importance of phonological skills when children are reading non-words that must be decoded versus frequent real words. And what we find is that their phonological awareness is much more important. It's much more predictive of their ability to read non-words that they have to decode than it is of their ability to read real words, which they can. There are other ways around it, and they could be using sort of other orthographic familiarity, for example, to read that, or semantic context, etc. So, message from this: the child isn't. Well, I guess this is a backwards way. I mean, you guys, the emerging literacy work, doing a much more proactive. Have a much more proactive approach to this. Our message is that if a child's not responding well to phonics, you should check their phonological awareness and check they've got those skills that they need. Whereas actually you're doing this proactively and checking that they've got those skills in the first place before you move them on to phonics teaching. So it ties in really nicely with the way. But what we had is the phonological awareness tests that we had. So they started off. So they're standardised tests that started off with quite easy stuff like syllable completion. So they've got a picture of watch, and you say wa, and they've got to say ch. So it isn't. And what we had, so 20% of the sample just couldn't score on any of our tests at all, even though they did start with sort of easier items. But what we want to do next is, so that study I just presented was, so it's a quasi-experimental study. You've got schools delivering two sort of programs that differ in lots and lots of different ways, and so it's actually quite hard to pinpoint what was exactly the difference. So we're assuming that the problem is that the letters and sounds program wasn't sufficiently helping their phonological awareness for those children who starting school with weaker phonological awareness. But we can't say for definite what was the difference between the programs. So what we're proposing to do to follow up is to do a short training study. So, and this will be in teachers in England. When a child isn't responding well to phonics, they tend to give them extra practice on the grapheme phoneme correspondences. That seems to be the first place to go. So if they seem to be struggling, they do more rehearsal of the letter sounds. Whereas my feeling is that they would be better off doing more rehearsal of the phonological awareness aspects, because those are so fundamental to actually getting phonics in the first place. And so what we want to do is a sort of short training study where we're comparing groups of children with poor phonological awareness, but then waiting until the second term of reception, so the second term of Prior 1, at least to give them a chance to see if those skills actually do develop naturally. But if they don't develop a second term, they're giving a short training study where we're comparing children who get extra training on the decoding plus the phonological awareness versus children who get extra training on the decoding plus the GPCs. And so that will sort of give a more precise picture about whether it really is the phonological awareness that's missing from those programs. So the theory is that it's the phonological awareness that's missing, and this would just sort of really pinpoint it more clearly. The next thing I want to talk about in relation to phonological awareness is trying to figure out what aspects of phonological awareness are most critical for reading. So the theory is that phonological skills are underlying the development of a decoding strategies, and there's lots of there's lots of evidence on correlations between children's performance on phonological tasks and their reading performance. But the problem is that phonological tasks are quite messy, like they're quite noisy. There's lots of different skills that they're tapping into all in one task. And so it's quite hard to work out what are the skills that are really important that children need. So classic tasks that might be used as asking children to say the first sound in ball. They might be asked to repeat back a non-word. Or they might be asked to delete part of a word. And these tasks are all tapping into lots of different things. I mean, they're tapping into more than what I've got here, but these are the three key components that we wanted to look at. So the assumption is that they're related to reading because they're linguistic tasks. They're using words or pseudo words, non-words. They're not using musical notes. And so there's the assumption that the relationship with reading is to do with the fact that they're linguistic tasks. It's not to do with the fact that it's not like a working memory task, for example. It's not just a generic working memory task. Another aspect of these tasks is that they're all the stimuli are always, so the words are complicated. So you're asking children to take the first sound out of bat, and in order to do that they need to segment it themselves, whereas it'd be a very different task if you said at what came first, and then they just have to remember the first sound. So you're requiring sort of a detailed phonological representation of the word. And the classic versions usually require children to say things out loud. So this is sort of the output phonology. They're actually having to prepare their phonological response, and they're having to actually articulate that. And it's not completely clear what the role is of these three different components of the task. So we did, as part of our study, this was actually with children in the middle of year 2, and we wanted to see what aspects of phonological awareness is really driving this relationship with reading. So we compared tasks that were children were isolating the first sound of a word, and it was done in a linguistic form, so they were doing it with phonemes. So we had sort of sequences of phonemes, so the child would hear g, k, p, and they'd have to say which one came first. And then you can do the same thing with musical notes, so you go b, 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 and then they have to say which of those musical notes came first. And we did these on a computer, so they were learning the associations between they had aliens on the screen. I should have had a picture of the aliens, but they were learning this. It was like sort of learning the piano. So there were 3 aliens, they made different sounds, and you were saying which alien came first, basically. And you can set up tasks like that to compare the same kinds of tasks where you've got phonemes versus the same kinds of tasks where you've got musical notes, and then that will let you look at, is it really to do with the fact that it's linguistic? Is it to do with the phonemes? Is that what's important? And then we do the same things, comparing tasks that used words where children had to actually segment it to get the answer versus phonemes that were already separated for them. So looking at whether it was the segmentation that was really important. And then finally we did tasks where they had to say it out loud versus tasks where they used the sort of the alien touchscreen thing to respond. And so this was really to try and work out which of these components were really critical for reading. And actually what we found was that although the musical tasks, children who are good at the musical tasks, they were better at reading, but over and above that, their ability to do the linguistic tasks was important over and above their ability to do the musical tasks. So it was suggesting that the fact that the tasks are linguistic is important. That's quite reassuring for theories of sort of phonological awareness and reading, because the assumption is that it's the linguistic part that matters. Also, that we found that children who were better at the tasks where the phonemes were already separated for them, they were better at reading, but the tasks where it was all in one word, where they had to actually do the segmenting, that was important over and above that. So segmenting skills was really, really critical over and above just sort of ordering sounds. And then finally we found that the verbal versions were predictive over and above the non-verbal versions of the tasks. And that final bit is the more surprising thing, because the theory sort of the dominant theories of phonological awareness and reading. It's all about the representations themselves. It's all about what's the quality of your phonological representation. Whereas what we were showing is that actually it's not just the quality of your representation, it's how good you are at accessing that and then articulating it. So actually having to say it out loud is important. But it isn't obvious in the literature that part of it is really important. And so what we were trying to do is just give a bit of extra precision. So you've got these tasks, they correlate with reading, but why do they correlate with reading? What aspects of the tasks are most important? And it really sort of, in general, like that, all of this work on phonological awareness is focusing towards the importance of promoting phonological skills in preschool and early primary on top of learning about letter sound. You can't just talk about letter sound, you have to also promote phonological skills. And the second part, in terms of which phonological skills are most important, suggests that because it's the segmentation that really matters, children's ability to, so working with individual phonemes doesn't seem to be as closely related to reading as working with words, where you have to split up, you have to do the segmentation yourself. So the best activities would involve phoneme segmentation and blending. And it's really important to do this out loud. So it's not just about how good's the child's representation, it's how good are they at accessing that and saying it out loud and articulating that. And so this ties in well with the Highland literacy activities, sort of phoneme blending and segmentation activities that are encouraging children to sound talk as much as possible. That kind of thing is obviously really that fits with this really nicely. I'd like to come, I don't know if there's, at the end, it'd be good to have a discussion about this, because obviously these are, segmentation out loud is the aspect of phonological awareness tasks that comes out as most strongly related to reading, and our year two, so these are, that would actually be primary 3 children. So these are sort of children that are able to read at this point. And so that seems to be the most closely related to reading in those children. I know that with your in the emerging literacy work, you're talking about sort of building blocks of phonological awareness, and then actually the segmentation comes later, and so there may well be other building blocks that you need. So you wouldn't just jump, just because segmentation is most closely related to reading, it doesn't necessarily mean that you would teach it in that way. So just because that's kind of, I guess it shows this is what you're aiming for, this is what they need to be able to do in order to be an effective reader. But then there's another question about how you get to that point and how you teach it. So
many of you will be familiar with the graphic that explores equality and equity. In terms of equality, what Laura presents is the importance of phonological awareness for all children through high-quality learning and teaching for all to raise attainment. In terms of the equity within Laura's presentation, she identifies that those children who may struggle to develop early decoding and encoding skills, there needs to be planned additionality on top of the high-quality learning and teaching in order to try and reduce the gaps in reading attainment. Laura's research indicates that children with poorer phonological awareness will need more phonological awareness in order to support their skills within decoding and encoding. Dr. Laura Shapiro's guidance on how we should prepare children for learning to read is included in the attachments for this network. Following Dr. Laura Shapiro's presentation, there are 3 questions for discussion. Firstly, discuss what the key learning was for you from this part of Laura's presentation. Secondly, discuss how your school's planned for phonological awareness development universally throughout this session for all of the children in order to raise attainment. And finally, how is your school planned for additional opportunities to develop phonological awareness skills for those with more gaps in an effort to reduce the gaps in attainment? You should now pause the video. In this next section, we're going to explore what taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy looks like in Primary 1. Over the last 3 years, the Emerging Literacy Networks have defined the key principles that underpin taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy. The first is around the quality of our adult-child interactions. Separate to this training are our Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages. The Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages have been developed to support quality adult-child interactions in the home environment and in early learning and childcare settings and schools. The second element that we consider is the quality of our learning environment and how our learning environment supports children's development. Seeing these two elements woven together, we need to reflect how our adult-child interactions support children's development within our learning environment. In this section, we are going to explore 3 of the attached resources for the network. We will look at the Primary 1 Emerging Literacy Overview, the Words Up Early Quality Interaction Monitoring Tool, and the Early Level Environment Guidance. The Primary 1 Emerging Literacy Overview is separated into the 2 sections of adult-child interactions and environment. Across early learning and childcare settings and Primary 1 classrooms, it's recommended that practitioners engage with the Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages. As mentioned previously, if you've not engaged with these as of yet, you can do so on the online training video. Following the training, it is recommended that practitioners identify a target for their own practice to be used as part of observation. The Words Up Early Quality Interactions Monitoring Tool can then be used following the training and setting a target of one of the key messages. The tool can be used as part of ongoing reflection and observation in order to benchmark interactions directly following the training and setting the target through to embedding the key message within practice. The Early Level Learning Environment Guidance has been put together to support practitioners in developing their environment in conjunction with the Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages. In taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy in Primary 1, this piece of guidance can sit alongside the specific environment guidance for phonological awareness, oral language, pre-handwriting, and concepts of print. In this guidance, there are explicit statements as to what taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy would look like in Primary 1. These have been developed based on the collaboration within networks over the last 3 years. In phonological awareness, practitioners have found it useful to use the phonological awareness screening tool at the beginning of Primary 1 to identify strengths and gaps in children's phonological awareness skills. The research suggests that phonological awareness skills are planned for alongside the teaching of phonics. Using the Phonological Awareness Tracker, practitioners can track ongoing progress in phonological awareness, updating this as children develop their phonological awareness skills. In a previous network, we've explored how the tracker can be used to support short-term planning. As well as this targeted phonological awareness based on children's strengths and areas for development, it's also recommended that phonological awareness skills are consolidated throughout the year, embedded within games, rhymes, songs, and stories. With regards to the first bullet point of oral language, it reiterates the point of practitioners setting a target in terms of the Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages. In oral language, practitioners should also consider the elements of vocabulary development through using aspects such as pre-teaching vocabulary to support the development of vocabulary instruction, as well as reflecting on their use of developmentally appropriate questioning, using the concrete to abstract questioning guidance through blank language that we have explored previously in the networks. The final bullet point is in providing opportunities for children to create texts orally. In the networks this session, we have distinguished between creating texts and the tools for writing, as listening and talking is the gateway into reading and writing. Practitioners can use the sequence and narrative guidance to support the development of creating texts orally. In pre-handwriting and pencil control, on Primary 1 entry, there are the 3 observation checklists of fine motor skills, scissor skills, and pre-writing skills that practitioners can use to inform their planning in the early stages of Primary 1. The Handwriting, Foundations and Building Blocks guidance recommends that practitioners continue to plan for these elements through the early stages of school. In between this and the formalised teaching of handwriting is the pencil control concepts and toolkit. This can be used to help support children develop the vital foundations in order to support the teaching of handwriting. When moving on to the formalised teaching of handwriting, practitioners are encouraged to include opportunities for children to develop the thinking, looking, doing skills. The handwriting guidance can help support this. In the concepts of print element, we firstly focus on the opportunities that children have for mark making across the environment. This sits embedded within the early level environment guidance, and the using texts to play and talk together guidance that we explored earlier this year can be used to support this through the plan, do, review cycle. Within the environment, children will have the opportunity to develop their print awareness skills, and practitioners will do this through pointing out the different features and modelling those features when they are creating texts. The final aspect of concepts of print is providing the opportunity for children to retell familiar stories and texts as a foundation to creating texts. Again, the sequence and narrative guidance can support this. Using the Emerging Literacy in Primary 1 overview, reflect and discuss the elements that your school has embedded in practice, that your school is currently working on embedding, and that your school is yet to consider. You should now pause the video. In this section, we are going to explore achievement of CFE levels at Primary 1. At this time of year, you will be recording your judgments of achievement of CFE levels at early level using the range of evidence that you have. The early level progression framework can be used to support this process. The progression grids can be used across the early level to identify where children are in their learning, and through the use of the You Can Help Me guides for each stage, the framework can be used to support planning. Throughout the session, we have explored the use of the early level progression framework in this way. The progression framework is one of the attachments for the network session. Using the progression framework, plot where each of your children are in Primary 1 using the range of information that you have. Once you've done so, discuss how have you based your achievement of a level information on the CFE benchmarks and the early level progression materials. For the individual children who are not yet at I apply, i.e. demonstrating achievement of early level, what additional opportunities to reduce gaps have been provided for them this session? Following this, discuss How will these individuals continue to be supported moving forward as they transition into Primary 2? You should now pause the video. In this next section, we are going to explore the transition from Primary 1 to Primary 2. In the Whole School Audit tool, the transition is encased with the Beyond Primary 1 section. That explores that during transition, children's progress in Primary 1 is shared with their teacher in Primary 2 to ensure continuity in planning matched to the strengths and gaps of each child. In this next video, we are going to hear from Donna from Newton Park about the transition arrangements for her children. Following this video, there will be a discussion task.
So we're at the end of the year now, we're in June, and your kids are about to transition from Primary 1 to Primary 2. What will the transition look like for these kids in terms of their foundational literacy skills?
So obviously in terms of phonological awareness, we take that approach across our school. So although some of the children look like they're secure in some of these skills, they need to consolidate, they need to work on phonological awareness within their phonics and their spelling learning and their reading and writing regardless. So they will continue with that into Primary 2. As well as that though, we have some children who still have some gaps within their phonological awareness skills who will need targeted support within their Primary 2 class as well.
In the video, Donna explained some of the transition arrangements that are in place between Primary 1 and Primary 2 in her school. As a group, you are going to discuss the two key points on the screen. The first point to discuss is what does the Primary 1 to Primary 2 learning transition look like in your school? And the second point to discuss is how is your school using the transition in order to support the development of a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication. You should now pause the video. In the final section of the network, we are going to explore around your school's next steps in taking a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication. In a series of workshops for senior managers across the Northern Alliance, we've been exploring the changes that are going to take place on the website to reflect the next steps in taking a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication. The support tools and resources on the website are going to be realigned into these four key areas. The first key area is around about taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy in early learning and childcare, and this will include the toolkit for emerging literacy in early learning and childcare to support training and development. The second section is going to be on taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy in Primary 1, and that will link you to the content that we explored in the earlier part of tonight's session on the same theme. The third section is going to be around about supporting children beyond the early level with gaps in their foundational literacy skills. This section will sit alongside local authority guidance on supporting children with persistent literacy difficulties. And the final section is on taking a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication, the elements worth considering. This is what we'll explore in the next part of this network. There are a few tools that have been created alongside the emerging literacy networks over the last few sessions to support schools in taking their approach to literacy, language and communication. The first is the Whole School Approach to Emerging Literacy audit tool linked to the quality indicators and How Good is Our School For. This is one of the attachments for today's network session and includes a number of statements linked to 5 of the indicators of Higgia's 4 that schools can use as part of ongoing self-evaluation when embedding the principles of taking a developmental approach to literacy, language and communication. The other tool that sits as part of tonight's attachments for the network that we've explored in previous sessions is the ADKAR model of change for taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy. This is a reflective tool that can be used by schools in tandem with the audit tool to reflect on where schools are in their journey from the awareness stage through to the reinforcement stage. Following this, schools can identify their key strengths and the aspects of next steps. In developing a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication, schools, through their curriculum rationale and ongoing professional learning, support staff to articulate the underpinning principle of taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy, which is effective differentiation, which matches the teaching and learning to the needs of each child, and the whole school approach in developing children's concepts of print, oral language, pencil control, phonological awareness, and working memory skills, both as a universal and a targeted approach, beginning in the early level of Curriculum for Excellence and onwards. In order to enable this, schools, through their curriculum rationale and ongoing professional learning, enable staff to understand the following elements of pedagogy. Through ongoing self-evaluation, schools identify areas of continuous development. The final attachment linked to today's session is the whole school approach to literacy, language and communication overview. This includes 8 of the elements that we've explored through the emerging literacy networks that schools can consider as part of their whole school approaches to literacy, language and communication within their school's literacy curriculum. To support schools, an online toolkit is currently being created with resources to support professional learning in each of the 8 aspects identified in the whole school overview. This will include a mixture of PowerPoints with facilitators' notes, training videos, and resources to use in classrooms. Schools are encouraged to create a strategic plan over the medium term, for example 3 years, to identify how they can embed the principles of taking a developmental approach to literacy, language and communication across their school. It may be, once using the audit tool and the ADKAR model of change reflection tool, that schools in the Buddy network identify similar areas for next steps, therefore providing an opportunity to work collaboratively on these areas of professional learning moving forward. We're going to hear again from Donna about how taking a developmental approach to literacy, language and communication is developing within her school improvement plan within her school.
In terms of taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy, what's that look like in the school improvement plan, for example?
So emerging literacy is a priority within our school improvement plan. All staff have been trained so that they are able to support targeted areas within emerging literacy and support children who have difficulties in areas such as phonological awareness right across the school. We've also looked at providing appropriate experiences within oral language, that we're looking at vocabulary development across the school, that we are looking at sequence and narrative. We are making sure that children are immersed in learning new language and that we're able to support them as they go through their school journey.
Working as a school and using the attachments from tonight's network in supporting a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication. Identify your top 3 priorities for taking a whole school approach to literacy, language and communication in the 2019 to 2020 academic session. You should now pause the video. Now that you've had the opportunity individually as a school to identify your next steps, across the Buddy group, share your school's next steps. Discuss if there are any elements that you could work on collaboratively through the school improvement planning process. You should now pause the video. You have now reached the end of the Buddy Network June 2019 video. You can find out more about taking a developmental approach to literacy, language and communication and the Emerging Literacy workstream on the Emerging Literacy area of the Highland Literacy blog and the Emerging Literacy drop-down on the Northern Alliance website.